Hello and welcome to LionWing Talks, a weekly show where we discuss all things LionWing tabletop games, Japanese games, and localization. I'm your host, Bradley Hailstorm, founder and president of LionWing. This is episode 20. We got some cool stuff to talk about tonight, folks. If you're joining us for the first time, hey, welcome. If you're catching us on playback, hey, welcome. We do this show live every Wednesday, Twitch, 9 p.m. ET. Throw that plug in there. If this is indeed your first time joining us, again, welcome. We've got a format to this show, and we're going to stick to that format tonight, though we are going to be changing up that format in the coming weeks. I'll talk about that maybe a little later if I remember. I'll probably forget. If I forget and I'm about to close the show, someone throw it in the chat. That way I remember to talk about it. Our format typically is the one we're going to be following tonight, and that is we're going to go through some community-submitted questions, and then we're going to go into our project updates, and then we'll close out the show. Now, unlike previous weeks, where we've had anywhere between 20 and 40 questions, tonight's a little bit lighter. We've got 13 questions tonight. Now, we've got a variety of questions. Some about LionWing, some about how LionWing is run, some about tabletop games, some about anime. So we've got an array of questions, and those are the types of shows that I like. I like when we've got all different types of questions. It keeps things interesting. I think it keeps folks engaged. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me thinking. It keeps me talking. Again, we are in crunch time, I guess you could say, for July's Kickstarter. So I did not have a lot of time to prepare for tonight's show. So I threw all the questions into a Word doc about an hour ago. And most of the time I get like one or two looks through of the questions. And usually that's not really enough to formulate any kind of response. And that's how I like it. I like to just have to kind of come up with the answers as I'm live on the air. No safety net, people. Tonight I looked at them one time, and that's as I was going into Discord and copying them over to my show notes. So this should be interesting. I don't know what kinds of answers you're going to get from me tonight, but they will probably be raw, unfiltered, and 100% authentic. If you're joining us in the chat, hey, thanks. Always appreciate when folks can join us live. If you are joining us live, drop me questions in the chat. I'm always watching the chat. And if you've got a question for me and you didn't have a chance to submit it through social or one of our Kickstarter campaign pages or through Discord, just drop it in the Twitch chat and I will get to it, I promise. Actually, we've already got someone who's going to be adding to the show questions, so I will get to that here in a second. Thanks, Retroflow. Much appreciated. So this is episode 20, which means officially we've been doing this for 5 months. That is hard to believe. I think it's been 5 months. Let's see here. February to March, March to April, April to May, May to June. No, 4 months. Okay, so maybe math's not my greatest subject. That's why I went into psychology, I guess. Don't ask me to do many math problems. Still, we've been at this for a long time. This is the thing that I look forward to the most throughout the week, actually. There's a lot of cool stuff that comes along with running a localization and publishing studio in the tabletop games industry. So I get to do a lot of cool things throughout the week, but this is actually the thing that I look forward to doing. It's kind of just like sit back, relax, talk, engage with you all, see some friendly faces in the chat, that kind of thing, answer some ridiculous questions some weeks, and then also get into the nitty-gritty of how to run a tabletop games company. I don't know if my answers are the ones you should use if you are going to open up a tabletop games company, but they are the answers that have worked for me. Sin in the chat says, straight diss to me and Beans on Monday nights. I'm sorry. So Sin Theory in the chat is one of our community leads. And if you've been keeping track, he has been one of the stars of our Monday show. That's right. We have a sister show. It's called LionWing Plays. And we play LionWing games on LionWing Plays. Sin Theory and our other community lead, Real Beans, are the two who are typically the ones playing some kind of LionWing game. And so, since I just said I look forward to LionWing Talks the most out of the week, I think Sin has taken it personally. I'm sorry, Sin. I look forward to LionWing Plays as well, but this is the flagship, and it's got a special spot in my heart because it was the first. It was my first child. Now, your first child isn't always your favorite child. Parents have no favorites. But since we're not dealing with human beings, I can honestly say this is my favorite show, though I enjoy LionWing Plays as well. Even if I'm not necessarily doing a whole lot with LionWing plays, usually I'm just kind of watching along with everyone else, and I'm just creating the space for other people to play. We've been playing Embryo Machine lately. We'll talk about Embryo Machine in our updates section. Got a little bit to talk about with Embryo Machine, some of which you probably will know about if you read the Kickstarter campaign update that I posted last night. More on that later. Let's get to our questions, shall we? I guess we now have 14 questions thanks to RetroFlow. Okay, so question number 1. What's something new you would love to see in the board game market? Okay, so I've got a couple things that I would like to see. Now, some of these things are already happening, but they're not happening on a large scale. Some are happening, and I think they just need to happen more. Some are not happening at all. And one of them might be a bit of a pipe dream. So let's see what happens here. So what's something new you'd love to see in the board game market? I would love to see more open world games. So I don't like open world video games, which I just disclosed earlier this week, actually. It was E3 week. And so we were doing a lot of conversation. There was a lot of conversation happening about video games, and I shared that I do not like open world games. I kind of hate them, which is really just me showing my age, and I'm sorry. It just is. I come from an era where, you played, arcade games. Some of my favorite games are arcade games. I mean, my favorite genre is RPGs, but I like a very specific brand of RPGs. I don't like open world RPGs necessarily. I like to be funneled down a path and be told a story. However, in board games, I think open world board games are really cool. I think they require you to conceptualize the game experience in a new way, in a different way than you typically would a non-open world board game. I think there are not that many of them, and I think that there's a real market there for people to explore and to iterate on and to make sort of a proper genre out of, which is probably something that the board game industry needs right now. We need some new genres. Even if it's just a derivative genre from a pre-existing genre, I think that is good for the health of this industry by and large. So more open world board games. I'd like to see solo tabletop RPGs, more of them. Certainly solo RPG adventures they're sort of gaining steam, and they have been gaining steam now for, I'd say, a year and a half, maybe a little bit before the pandemic. Which is really heartening to see as someone who loves solo tabletop gaming of any kind. It doesn't matter if it's a card game, a board game, tabletop RPG. I just want to see more of them, and I think people want to see that as well. Now, it's a genre that's harder to do effectively because there are some solo TTRPGs out there that aren't very good. So it is hard to get down, and it's not necessarily when you venture into the solo market, it's not exactly a tabletop RPG any longer. You get more kind of like writing adventures, which is cool. I would like to see someone really take a TTRPG proper and figure out some sort of meaningful variant to it. I think that would be fun. 5 Parsecs from Home is more of what I'm looking for from the TTRPG market when I think about solo adventures. I think that game should be used as a bit of a blueprint for people to consult and to understand on a conceptual design level, so that they then can, prospective designers, so that they can then kind of use some of those elements to build upon and add to the genre. So solo tabletop RPGs. I'd like to see more dungeon crawlers out of Japan. There just aren't any. There's a handful. And actually, that's probably an overestimation. There's probably 2. I think I've talked about them on stream before. It's a genre that just doesn't... I don't even know if I can say it doesn't do well, because it's not really being explored. Of course, every territory in the world seems to have the games that they like more than other territories, and genres that they don't like as much. So Japan just doesn't have a lot of dungeon crawlers. I don't know if that's because they don't like them. I don't know if that's because the designers don't like them. I don't know if that's because some of the reason that I'm not thinking of, perhaps it's just not explored a whole lot, and there are other genres that do well in Japan, and so there's less of an incentive to go outside that box and to delve into something that is just in some cases decidedly Western in its approach. I don't know what that's about, but I would like to see more of it, more dungeon crawlers from Japan. Another thing that I would like to see some level of MMORPG like game implemented to the tabletop. Something where you can play with a good number of players, anywhere between, let's say, 2 and 12 people, maybe a little bit more. You'd have to have an expansive play area, but I think it could be done. Where players could delve into quests on their own, where players could link up and engage in cooperative quests with one another, where players could engage in PvP if they would like, and that there would be some semblance of a persistent leveling system. That is not being tried really at all. There are games that tap into elements of what I just talked about, but there is no single game that pulls it all together in the exact way that I'm thinking of. And so I think that would be a really cool experience. I think that as the board game market continues to grow, people are going to be looking for new ways to engage with the medium, and I think that would be a cool way to do it, and it hasn't really been tried before. So, yeah, I'd like to see that. Let's see here. I probably missed some things in the chat. What's going on here? Aren't worker placement games open world games? There's a good BGG guild for solo RPG players. There are actually plenty of groups around the old interwebs, on and off BGG, that are dedicated, if not exclusively, predominantly for solo RPG adventures. And so there's a crowd, there's a market out there. Now, the market's not super big, but I do think it's growing. It definitely is growing. When Modifius gets into the game, and they're the folks publishing 5 Parsecs from Home, you know that something's happening in that space. And that's exciting when a big publisher jumps on something, because in many ways they can be sort of the spearhead, right? Who can lead that charge, and other people can follow suit to say, hey, you know what, that's actually a viable genre. And that gives designers the space and the security and stability of knowing, hey, I can design this game, and it's not only got a market, but there's prospective publishers out there who would want to do something with this. So let's see here. Shinska says, you seem to love Valkyria Chronicles. Any thoughts on turning it into a board game? I have plenty of thoughts about turning Valkyria Chronicles into a board game. I think there's a couple ways you could skin that cat, so to speak. So to me, the most obvious way is you make it a skirmish miniatures game. I think there's a whole lot you could do that with various squads. There's a lot of lore you could pull from. You could match up various squads from all 4 games, or if you wanted to include, and this is blasphemous to say, Valkyrie Revolution in there, you could even pull those characters in, and it would be cool for characters from different timelines or from different sections in Valkyria's history, lore history, teaming up or going against one another. So I think a skirmish miniatures game is probably the most obvious way to go. But I think you could probably break that down into a more accessible format, be it in something like an Embryo Machine, if you wanted something a little smaller in scale, cheaper to produce. I think that there's an opportunity for some cooperative type of games for Valkyria Chronicles. I think you could do something with a tabletop RPG with Valkyria Chronicles. It's the type of game that's got the type of story, it's got the type of characters, and it's got the type of visual design that would translate really well to the board game arena. If you said you could make a Valkyria Chronicles game right now, what would it be? I would immediately say, all right, we're making a miniatures game. And as I've said before, we're not a miniatures company, but I would become a miniatures company for Valkyria Chronicles game. Straight up. I think you could probably also turn Valkyria into a card game. It just the theme wouldn't translate as well, but you can turn anything into a card game, and people have turned anything into a card game. And so Valkyria could be a card game if you designed it well enough. There's probably elements of its mechanics that you could pull into a card game dueling format, a battle card game format, that I think would probably be pretty cool. But again, that wouldn't be my go-to genre. It would not be. I would just love to see some of Valkyria's characters in miniatures form. There's not a whole lot of anime miniatures out there. I mean, we had what, Anima Tactics? Is that the name? Like what was that, a decade ago or so? Which was super cool to see anime-like characters represented in miniatures form. That was super cool. And you've got some smaller games that have the character designs of the anime variety. But there's nothing quite like Valkyria's setting. And then to take that setting and to translate it to a tabletop game with miniatures, I think would be pretty unparalleled. And I think it'd do really well. Now, the problem is despite the fact that Valkyria Chronicles 4 sold 1 million copies across all of its platforms, a million copies isn't like a ton. And so you got to figure, of those million players who bought Valkyria Chronicles 4, how many play tabletop games, and then how many of those folks want a Valkyria Chronicles tabletop game? So you start like really breaking down your demographic, and you probably get to a pretty small group of folks who want that game. And knowing what Sega's, knowing what their minimum guarantees are and what their royalties are, it would be it would not be an impossible model, but it would be a tough sell to a publisher to take a risk on something like that, because A, there's nothing to really compare it to, and B, you don't know if that market is there. I think it could be there in some degree, but is it there enough to justify all of the work, resources that would have to go into making that a thing? I'm not sure. It would be a pretty big gamble. Super Dungeon Crawl, yeah, I don't consider Super Dungeon Crawl. I mean, it's got the anime aesthetic, but it's not from Japan. Not to play that card, but it's not. So, yeah. There. I didn't even look down at your bottom message, Ben. Not actually a Japanese company, though, obviously. Yeah. So that's more of what I'm talking about. Yeah. I mean, you do have. I'm thinking of one. I'm thinking of one Cool Minis or Not game. Oh my gosh, what is that? Raiders? Oh shoot. I hate not being able to find an answer to a question that I've created in my own head on stream, because knowing you're on stream puts like another barrier to you finding the question in your mind. No, not Arcadia Quest, though Arcadia Quest is cool. That is going to drive me nuts. But I'm not going to look it up on stream because no one wants to listen or watch me do that. But yeah, so the aesthetic is out there. But even when you talk about Arcadia Quest or SDC, it's a very like chibi SD approach to the Japanese anime aesthetic, and that is a very different visual presentation than something that would be like Valkyria Chronicles. So yeah, I think Valkyria Chronicles would be cool though. All right. Someone in the chat said, yo, been playing Root all week with some friends. That's a great game. Top 3. Yeah, a lot of people love Root. For sure. Not really a game for me, but I respect what it does. And I respect how popular it is and how many people love that game. We're going to be talking about that in question 6 tonight. A game that I don't love, but a lot of other people do. Question 2, how do you handle porting games/demo versions to Tabletop Simulator in reference to the original developer's wishes? Is TTS something you will consider when porting a game or future projects? Yeah, so some developers do not want their stuff on Tabletop Simulator. Or through any digital means, for that matter. For a variety of reasons, both obvious and not so obvious. Both reasonable and not so reasonable. For us, we typically pitch the idea to the developers early on to say, like, hey, we don't have to do this, but I want to throw this out there. We have the means to convert this to a Tabletop Simulator, at the very least demo. What do you think of that? Would you be open to it? And some games, I think, are perfect matches for TTS, especially competitive games, and especially games that are going to have a long turnaround time where you're going to pledge to the Kickstarter in July, and then you're not going to get it until September of the following year. Then I think utilizing TTS is a great way to keep players engaged, keep backers engaged for the next 14 months that it's going to take you to, deliver that game to their doorstep. So I think it makes sense there. I think it makes sense for battle or duel based games. A game like Made Night Saga, for instance, no, we're not, we don't have any plans to make a tabletop simulator version of that, because I think part of that game's experience is actually having the tangible components and resources there to play it in the way that it was designed. Whereas something like Gun and Gun makes a lot of sense to be on Tabletop Simulator. I think Embryo Machine borders on being perfect for Tabletop Simulator and not being perfect at all for Tabletop Simulator. But it is a battle card game, and I do like to put those on there because anytime that you're dealing with a competitive game, you want to build a community around that. And one of the ways to build a community around it is to make playing the game accessible, especially as you wait, or especially, as we've been in this pandemic and you can't as easily access, resources and real life people in physical spaces, then it makes a lot of sense to put it on TTS. So Embryo was one of those ones where I was like, yeah, you know what, component wise, you probably this is the type of game you want to move your components around on a board. It just feels right. And at the same time, we launched in February. Things weren't looking too good pandemic-wise, and I knew that it was a competitive game, and I wanted there to be some kind of community behind it. So, I went to Kawakami-san and Shigaki-san, Kosaic at large, and said, hey, do you mind if we put this on there? And they're like, no, that's totally fine, because, hey, guess what? We already have the Japanese version on there. Go for it. So, that was a real easy sell. So it just kind of depends on the game. It kind of depends on the designer. Sometimes you can coerce a designer into it a little bit, and it works in that regard. So there's multiple variables that you've got to consider when thinking about a TTS version. Some other things you have to consider as well. One, are you going to make an official tabletop simulator version of your game? Because you can reach out to the developers of Tabletop Simulator, and if they dig your game enough, they'll put you in a queue and say, you know what, I think this would make sense to release something official through us. We'll go ahead, we'll develop it for you. Let's make something official. But that means you probably don't want to put any of your assets on Tabletop Simulator now, because then why would anyone play the real thing that they have to pay money for if they can just play, even if it's a watered down version that's not as sleek, they can play it for free, So you got to think about that. Like, is that in your future? Do you want to do that? And B, do the developers of Tabletop Simulator versions see enough in your product to say, yeah, I want to spend resources on converting that to something official? The other thing to think about is, are you ever going to have an actual digitization of your tabletop game? A true digital variant port of your board or card game. In which case, if the answer is yes, then even if the answer is maybe, you probably don't want to put your stuff on Tabletop Simulator right away. Now, if you decide later down the road, like, nah, I'm not going to pursue that, okay, whatever, throw it on TTS then. But certainly if you have it in your mind that at some point this is going to be something more than just a board game, okay, maybe you don't want to put it on Tabletop Simulator. So there's a lot that goes into making that decision. Things that you, as the publisher on the Western side of things, have to decide, and also things on the Eastern side of things that have to be decided by the original designers. So it's complicated. There's a lot of things to consider there. I wish it were easier than that. I wish it were as easy as a simple, yep, we're putting it on there, note, we're putting it on there, but there's a lot of variables you got to consider. And a lot of long-term planning that you got to consider as well, because you may not immediately know right away if you're going to take a game to digitization later on down the road. You just don't. Okay, question 3. When designing the 3D renders for Embryo Machine, what considerations were taken to ensure that customers will have successful prints using the various 3D printing technologies, SLA, PLA, for example? Yeah, so it always comes down to the details. How detailed are your minis? What spiky, pointy, slender, tiny parts look great in concept but look like absolute piss when you print them off, in actual execution? Because some things look great in a render in a rendering program, and then you print it out and it's like, well, that didn't work at all because it's too small, it's too narrow, it's too this, it's too that. That's not going to work. People don't, that's just not going to work. People are not going to be happy with that. So you got to consider that. Those were our main concerns anyway with Embryo Machine, especially the designs, because some of the designs of the Embryo Machine units themselves didn't translate super well to renders. And now we're still going to be doing a various test prints of what we've created so far of our renders and making changes as necessary. But even still, before that happened, the lead designer and I were talking like, all right, so this is just not going to work. This is not going to look good when we're going to have to change this design somewhat for it to make sense and for it to be printable. We did that with, oh my gosh, I think it was Hystrix. I think that was the first time that it really, came up where the designer was like, yo, we're going to have to make some changes here because I can tell you right now that this is not going to work. But there are some things also where he and I were like, you know what, this is probably not going to work, but let's leave it in there and see what happens. And I mean, because I've known all along that I was going to do a bunch of print tests to figure out what has worked and what won't work, and then we'll go back and we'll make modifications as necessary. But that's been sort of the expectation going in. It's been really nice to know that we don't have to get these done until the game launches, and the game doesn't launch for another 6-ish months. So it's like, from February, we've had a lot of time to tool around with this, and we still have plenty of time to do a bunch of test prints to ensure that we get things looking just the way they are. So if we had a more aggressive, which would have been stupid, but if we would have had a more aggressive timeline on Embryo Machine's delivery, then it would be more stressful. But because we've given ourselves a nice window here to get everything right, it's been a pretty stress-free environment to work on those renders and to talk about like, hey, I think this will work, or hey, this definitely won't work, or hey, this might, let's take a chance and let's just see. And so that's been a good part of the process. Now we are done with those renders, and I'll talk about what that means in the Embryo Machine update. Question 4, this is an add-on to the question that I just answered. Will we be shown any actual 3D prints of the renders on future LionWing Talks? Yes. As mentioned in last night's Embryo Machine campaign update, we'll be doing a series of test prints, as I just said before as well, to see what works and what doesn't work with our current models. And then I'll be showing those off both through the campaign, on social media, in Discord, and of course here on LionWing Talks. Question 5. Is there any news, and this shifting gears here a little bit, is there any news on other Wild Hunt Festival DLCs that were planned for around this time? Yes, indeed. I'm going to be showing off some concept art from our next one during the Wild Hunt Festival update. So sit tight for like the next, 20 minutes. Question 6. I like this question. Is Uno a good game? So Uno has sold approximately 150 million copies since its inception in 1970 or 1971. I don't think you sell 150 million of anything without that thing being good. Now, to harken back to what we were talking about, or what I was talking about a couple minutes ago about Root, Uno's not a game for me. I don't think it's fun. I liked it as a kid. I played a lot of Uno with my grandma. That was cool. I've got some good memories around the game, so it's done something for me. But I would never play it today. In fact, I think the last time that I played Uno was with my grandma when I was probably 12 or 13. And so I don't have any interest in the game now. But just because I don't have an interest in it, clearly means absolute shit. It doesn't mean anything because plenty of people play Uno. There's probably hundreds of thousands of people right this very second playing Uno around the world. That's kind of crazy to think about. Fern in the chat says, Uno works exactly as designed, therefore it is good. It may not be fun, but it in fact works. It absolutely works. Again, you don't sell 150 million of anything if it doesn't work. You just don't. So functionally, great game. As a casual game for people just looking for a casual experience, great game. For Bradley, not a great game. Does that logic apply to Monopoly? Asks Ben. Oh, I think so. I mean, I hate Monopoly. So like, I don't like Uno, but I don't hate Uno. Like if someone put it in front of me, I'll play it. I will never pick it up on my own. But if someone like is like, hey, let's play some Uno, I'd say, well, I don't really want to, but sure, I will. Now, if someone put Monopoly in front of me, and unless your bargaining chip is I'm going to kill someone important to you unless you play this game, I am not playing Monopoly. I hate Monopoly. I think it's a garbage game. But again, plenty of people around the world say otherwise. Ben says there's Monopoly, and then there's Monopoly playing by the actual rules. Yeah, and neither's fun. Sin Theory in the chat says, I like the Uno that shoots cards at you. And by I mean it was fun the first time. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I kind of feel that way about all of those games. Uno, Monopoly, and then you like start getting what I consider like bottom of the barrel, garbage stuff that the plebs like, like Life and Sorry and all of that. I'm not judging anyone for liking any of those. Like if you like those games, right on, but I just hate them. Yeah. So Ben in the chat says, I like that version of Uno when the card shooter worked, which for us was approximately never. Yeah. I think the only version of Uno that I like is the one that I'm not playing, Question 7. Do you feel any of the skills you developed in your job as a social worker translated well into the job you do now? Yes, I think so. I held various positions in the social work field. I was like a boots on the ground, front lines social worker. I was a psychotherapist. I was a clinical supervisor. I was a clinical director. So kind of held positions at various levels, which all required different skill sets. But I think you could take any of those jobs and the skill sets that they require to excel at, and you could apply them to any industry. It doesn't matter what they are. I think social workers are incredibly versatile because social work at the end of the day is about communicating and connecting with another human being enough to where they buy into you and they buy into the idea of wanting to make change and believing that change is possible. And, in social work, you're working with folks who, by the time that you see them, most of the time they've had years at minimum and at most multiple decades to learn a behavior that hasn't worked out well for them. And so they come to you and you've got to figure out how to work around those barriers, but also help them live life and approach life a little bit differently than they have in the past, in a way that's more effective, in a way that's more efficient, in a way that's healthier, right? And so the only way you can do that, though, to ask someone to change everything that they've ever learned and to change sort of their compass, which is at the core of them, giving them direction of how to get through life, is they have to like you. And you can't put on a show for them to like you. When someone gets to you and they're a client, you're a social worker, like they've already been through several social work type providers before. And so they've got a great bullshit meter. And so you can't put on a front as a social worker. Like if you can't coerce someone as a social worker, you can't, because they'll see through it. And so you have to be your authentic self, and your authentic self has to be a pretty good one. And so that same theory applies to this job on multiple levels. In my role, I'm working with teams of people who are doing the actual work of translating, localizing, editing, play testing, designing, etc. I've got to interface with those people, and each person is different. Everyone's coming to this job with a different life story, with a different life context, with a different life history. And I have to take all of that into account when I'm communicating with that person, because humans are not a one size fits all approach. Like, that doesn't work for us. We all come to the table with our own shit. We come to the table with our strengths, and we come to the table with our baggage. And when you're working with people in an intimate environment, when you're working on a creative project, you've got to be able to keenly pick up on what those things are, and then play to people's strengths, and to be able to talk with them in a way that's going to make sense for them. So when you're a social worker, you see such a vast array of folks from various walks of life, different ages, different races, different genders, what have you. You have to have a very diverse skill set, and you have to have a very high EQ. You got to have a very high level of emotional intelligence so that you can sort of adjust to what that client needs so that you can best help them. This industry, in my position, is no different when I'm working with staff, that I've got to be able to adjust to figure out how to best help someone meet the vision that I'm asking them to meet. And so the skill set is quite one-to-one, really. And then on this end, I communicate with all of you. I have to be able to communicate with all of you because it's what I want to do, but it's also important for you all to know where we're at as a company. And you learn effective communication when your job as a social worker is to talk to people all day. I was a psychotherapist in private practice for years and years and years. I'd see 45, 50 people a week, so many different types of folks come to counseling, looking to make some kind of change in their life, and everyone's different. And so you have to be able to talk. You got to be able to listen. That's the first skill that you always have to have as a counselor. But after that, you got to be able to talk. You got to be able to make a connection with another human being, and you get pretty good at that, doing it 50 hours a week for years on end, sitting 5 feet from someone in a chair, listening to what's been going on in their life and trying to troubleshoot okay, all right, got what's going on. How do we work with this? How do we work around this? That kind of thing. And so communication skills are absolutely necessary. Moreover, I did a lot of corporate presentations in social work where I would go out to corporations and help employers be able to identify the signs of mental illness or addiction with their staff, with their employees, so that they could link them up with some kind of EAP plan so that they could get them counseling if they felt that was necessary, instead of just straight firing someone because someone is presenting at work as, disheveled, which is indicating some level of depression or something. I would go in there and say, all right, so here are the signs that you're looking for. And oh, by the way, you don't just fire them. Here's what you can do to actually help them. And so I did a lot of presentation work, a lot of workshops. All of that carries over into what I'm doing right now on this show. So I guess some people would say, what the hell does a social worker have to do with a creative in the board game industry? And I would say my response to that would be, well, quite everything, actually. So yeah, I do feel like the skills that I developed in that field are absolutely important and relevant in this one. Question 8. So not as serious as the last question. Who is your favorite Advance Wars CO and why? So I had to think about this one. So I love Advance Wars. I'll talk about that. Actually, in the next question, Days of Ruin is my favorite entry in the series because it's the darkest. I like dark stuff. I've got a certain level of nostalgia for the first game, but Days of Ruin is my preferred Advance Wars game. And so it only makes sense that Lynn is my favorite CEO. She's a ground unit-based CEO who mostly focuses on scout skills, as well as increasing units' vision, their range, and also being able to spot enemies that are hiding wherever. And I like that kind of character, and I like her visual design. I think she's cool as fuck looking. So yeah, Lynn. Question 9. What's your biggest E3 highlight? So as I mentioned, E3's been going on this week. It was weird for E3 to start on a Saturday, by the way. It was very strange. And to have Microsoft take what is normally Bethesda's spot as that Sunday evening presentation, it was like a real stark reminder that we're in this new era where like Microsoft owns everyone and everything, including Bethesda. So it's like that took a minute to adjust. E3 nothing to report edition. Yeah, well, so I don't know about that. I don't think that's true. I think there wasn't a whole lot to report on up until the Nintendo Direct yesterday. But as I said, I don't think there was a whole lot to report on, which means I think there were some things to report on up until the Nintendo Direct yesterday. So I think Microsoft had a fine showing. They didn't reveal anything like, terribly interesting. This isn't like Microsoft of E3 2015 where they revealed what Phantom Dust and Scalebound in the same presentation, which was freaking wild. Like, what a time to be alive. And then, to have them do their presentation this year, and it's like, okay, cool, a new Forza Horizon game. Don't get me wrong, I love Forza Horizon. Like, I think that series is the best racing series in gaming right now. But like, it's hard to get excited about Forza Horizon 5 because, there's been 4 before it, and every Forza game at least Horizon, every Forza Horizon game kind of feels like the last, but like way prettier. And so I'm like, oh, cool. Like, this game looks amazing on Series X. Like, the graphical fidelity is pretty jaw-dropping. And, I will notice that graphical fidelity for the first 30 minutes that I play. And then because you're staring at the screen for longer than 30 minutes, you stop seeing that and you just really kind of rely on, well, the gameplay has to be the thing that keeps me around for the next 30 minutes. And I'm afraid that once I get to the second 30 minutes of Forza Horizon 5, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, this is a good game. It's Forza. I think I'm good now. I've played this game for like the past 10 years. I'm probably okay. That being said, I still think Microsoft had a fine showing, even if it was fairly unremarkable. I guess I wanted to see Everwild, which is the Rare project, though I heard that Everwild has been completely rebooted. They've got a new either producer or lead designer, and so I'm a little worried about that game. I'm not sure it's ever going to see the light of day, which is unfortunate. I like the idea of Everwild, and so yeah, that was a bummer. And then the Square conference before the what was that, on Monday? I thought they had a decent showing. I think Stranger of Paradise is interesting. It's not a game for me necessarily. Like, I don't give a shit about playing like Neo in a Final Fantasy world. Like, that doesn't do anything for me. But I'm cool that that kind of game exists. Even if I think every meme about Jack is accurate, and even if I believe that it looks like Square called Platinum Games and was like, yo, so I know Microsoft can Scalebound. Can we like use that main protagonist asset? Just drop the headphones, of course, because we'd like to use that as the main character in this new origin stories of Final Fantasy that Team Ninja's putting together. Like, aside from the fact that Jack looks exactly like the Scalebound character, and the fact that he's just like rocking some normal clothes that looks like he just like went to Old Navy and like came out and was like, I don't know. I think it's a fine game. I'm glad it exists, even if it's not for me. I think Final Fantasy Pixel Remastered is for me. I'm excited about that, even if I think all they're going to do is just update the current mobile ports that are on Steam and the mobile games themselves with a reversion back to their either original pixel art or touched up pixel art, which anything other than those mobile sprites is better. I mean, I would take actual defecation with eyes and mouths over the mobile port aesthetic of Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6 specifically. Or I guess 5 and 6 specifically. So I thought Square was okay. They showed a lot of Marvel stuff, which was weird. Like, hey, this is a Square conference. We're going to talk a long time. And you're like, oh, hell yeah. They're going to be talking about RPGs for days. And like, oh, no, you're going to talk about Marvel games for like 2 hours. Other than that, so to your actual question, your biggest E3 highlights, of course, Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp. That's my number one. Fatal Frame, Made of Dark Water, which is super rad that it's coming out to modern consoles, Switch, PS5, Series, all that good stuff. That game was rad on Wii U, and of course, because it was on Wii U, like 3 people played it. I'm assuming it's going to get a physical release, which is also exciting. It didn't get that on Wii U because, again, like 3 people would have bought it. And then, yeah, Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster. Let's see here. I haven't been looking at the chat. Sen in the chat said, I think Microsoft's doing some cool things, mainly bringing most of their titles day one to Game Pass. Yeah, by far the most value for your buck on any game subscription service. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've got a Series X over there. I have Game Pass. I think it is the best value in gaming. I probably play my Series X more than my PS5 just because of Game Pass. Even if conceptually I like PS5 more, and I like what what PlayStation stands for more than Microsoft, but I like Microsoft, what Microsoft is doing. Now, as someone who likes physical media, I don't love that they clearly want to get out of that business as quick as possible, because I guess they assume that any purchase of a physical disc game is one less subscriber to Game Pass, and they are absolutely, their business is Game Pass these days. So I get it, but that model is not for me as someone who likes physical stuff. But I like Microsoft. I think they had a good showing. Question 10, what are your opinions on releasing game assets with Creative Commons non-commercial license? It helps the modding community. It helps the game survivability after commercial support drops, and the impact on sales should be similar to putting the game on TTS. Yeah, I love it and I support it. As I've mentioned many times, I love fan-created content. I think it does exactly what you just talked about there. I think it increases the life of a game. I think it keeps people engaged in the product, which means if you're not finished supporting the game officially, that means they're going to stay engaged until you release the next bit of content, which is always good for you as a business. I think it keeps your brand, not just the game, but your brand as the publisher in people's minds. And that's always a good thing if you're running a business, for people to remember you. And I think it's fun. I think it's fun for the consumer, the player. I think it allows them to engage with the property in a new way that's meaningful to them, that's relevant to them, that's relevant to the community. I think it's a great way for a community to stay together, to bind together, and to have fun together. And a big part of LionWing is about creating communities, strong, healthy, fun communities. And one of the ways to do that is allow fans to be a part of the process at some level, even if it's just fan-supported, non-official content. I still think that's an important part of this entire machine called the board game industry, and with LionWing. So I support it. Follow-up question 11. Do you think convincing a Japanese rights holder is doable? And this is where you get into your problems. I think it depends on the rights holder, of course, but generally I don't think it's doable. Japanese designers, in my experience, tend to be protective of their work. And I'm not saying that's reasonable or unreasonable. I'm simply objectively saying they are protective of their work. And that means not allowing it to be tinkered with if they can help it. So that presents a problem, because even if I love and support fan content, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the designers don't support that kind of thing. Now, one of sort of a driving force behind my supporting is I think it's going to happen one way or the other. I think it's going to happen whether you want it to or not. If people like your game, they are going to want to continue to engage with that game in a way, again, that is meaningful to them. And that typically looks like creating fan content. You can't stop that. Even if you're like, I fucking hate it, I don't support it. Like, too bad. People are going to be people, and they're going to do their thing. And, oh, by the way, it's a huge compliment if people like your shit enough to want to take time out of their day to create content for your game. I think that's awesome as hell. So let's embrace it, because it's not going anywhere anyway, and people are going to do it anyway. So get behind it. Learn to love it. All right. 2 more questions. Question 12. What anime would you recommend to someone who's never seen any anime? Well, I would first recommend the one that got me into the genre, and that's Perfect Blue. But Perfect Blue is pretty dark. And I mean, at this point, it is how many years old? 20 years old, 20 plus years old, maybe. Maybe it was not. Maybe Perfect Blue came out in 99. That's probably about right. Somewhere in the late 90s. So maybe it's showing its age. I don't know. I got old guy's eyes. So like when I watch an anime from like 99, I'm like, oh yeah, this looks fucking great. But even if you can get over that, like Perfect Blue is a very specific flavor of anime. It's again, it's pretty dark and uncomfortable, and not everyone shows up to anime to be uncomfortable. But I fucking love it. I do. I think it's my favorite anime. I don't know that. I'm not going to say that because my answer kind of changes on the day of what my favorite anything is. But aside from that, let's say you can't choose Perfect Blue or whatever. Someone's like, no, that's not for me. I would say, what would I say? What would I say? What would I say? New school. I think My Hero is super accessible. I think the writing's great, characterization's great, action's great, story arcs are great, very relatable. Got a nice blend of humor, seriousness, and heart-touching moments. So My Hero is good. Even if it's kind of an obvious pick, whatever. It's a good entry point. If we go back a little bit further, I would say FMA. Doesn't matter which one. I mean, if you're like a someone who really, really like, you have to watch anime that has a certain visual fidelity to it, then you probably want to stick with Brotherhood, even though I think vanilla FMA is the better of the two series. And, you know, the community's split on that, like 50-50. Some people say Brotherhood's better and other people will say OG is better. I tend to think that original, the 2004 series, 2003, 2004 series is the better one. Mostly because I think it's slightly darker. Are you sensing a trend here? I like dark anime. I think FMA holds a special spot in my heart because I went into that. Let's see, it came out. I was graduating high school, or maybe I just started college. I don't know. I was still pretty naive to anime, even though at that point I'd been watching it for several years. But I remember like I didn't really know anything about FMA. I started watching it, and I'm like, oh yeah, like this is cool. Like this is very shonen like, whatever. And then that series gets fucking dark quick. I'm like, so I think it made such an impression on me and why I like it so much. Because I'm like, dude, that shit went places. It went places I did not expect. So I like that. And if you want to go back even further, I mean, of course, Cowboy Bebop. Like, I've never met anyone who didn't like the series. Never. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who don't. I just haven't met them. So I think it's a pretty good place to start. But it too is showing its age, right? So, yeah. There you've got a couple different from various eras. Let's see here. What did I miss? The usual recommendation is Cowboy Bebop because it relies very little on anime tropes. Yep. Very accessible. Ben said, I watched FMA until the Chimera arc. My younger sister also watched it and was traumatized. Yes. So the Chimera arc was actually the one that I was thinking of when I was remembering my time watching it. Like, oh yeah, like this is fun. Like, okay, like it starts off, it's got some dark elements. I mean, you know, your brother's lost his body. He's trapped in a suit of armor. You lost your arm. Like, okay, so it's got some dark elements. But I remember thinking like, yeah, by and large, this is pretty benign. Then that Chimera arc hits, right? And it's like, oh, so that's what we're doing here. Okay. Let me, I got to get into a different state of mind to do this. Yeah, okay, Mox is, yes, okay, so we're all in agreement. Question 13, the last one. Any Japanese food, snacks, or drinks you really like? Ramune, of course, the soda candy. And so I've been really on this Tejado caramel corn puffs lately, which you can get from Amazon, which is awesome. So good. That's been kind of my thing lately. So those two come to mind. All right. that's it for. Oh no, hold on. I had a sigh. I did. Hold on. I'm getting to it right now. I missed Sai's question last week, so here we go. With Keep Dry making Gun and Gun merch, sleeves, mats, stickers, etc., and LionWing hopefully getting a web shop soon, is it planned or possible that we can buy their G&G merch in our store in the future? No, it is not. For a number of reasons. One, I don't think they want to do that. Two, logistics. The handling of money, royalties, shipping charges, getting that stuff shipped in a timely manner at a time when mail delivery services are still a little unreliable. So they wouldn't want to do it. Logistics would get in the way of doing it. And I'm not sure that when the web shop opens that I want to be selling other folks' stuff right away. So, sorry, Sai, I was not avoiding that question. Just kept forgetting. And then there was another question in the chat in the beginning. Let's see here. Yes, from RetroFlow. Okay, with a lot of Kickstarters leaning towards miniature-heavy games, LionWing seems to license more card-based games. Is this a conscious decision on your part from a business standpoint, or is it just that you guys haven't found a miniatures game that you're passionate about? Yeah, so it's been a very conscious choice, because while I like miniatures games myself, I don't care to localize them, and I certainly don't care to pay the costs associated with printing them, and then the costs associated with freight shipping them, and then the costs associated with warehousing them, because they're fucking huge and take up a ton of space, which costs money by square foot. And then I don't care to pay the absorbent shipping costs that you have to eat to send a miniatures heavy game to someone, because people expect such low shipping rates these days that you can't actually ship what you're supposed to ship for. So you got to eat that cost, and I don't want to eat that cost, especially at a time in LionWing's life when we're still on the ascent. We're still making our way through this. We're not at the peak, and so we're still a small business, and we eat enough shipping costs when it comes to the Kickstarter. As I've shared before, we tend to undercharge for shipping and then take about a $5,000 to $10,000 bath in shipping costs that we eat. And I certainly don't want to continue to do that or do it more because we have gotten into the miniatures game market. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't get into the miniatures market at some point, but it's not right now. And there are not a lot of Japanese games that utilize miniatures that I'm all that interested in. Or hell, there's just not a lot, period. However, there are two that I am interested in. So Dorosure is one that I probably would eat crow and go back on everything I just said there to be able to publish. But the original publishers of Dorosure are very particular about how they envision an international release of their game. They're very particular about how its localization should be handled. They're very particular about the business arrangement, i.e. royalties, should be arranged. There are a lot of particulars around that game, and I'm not saying they're reasonable or unreasonable. I'm just saying they objectively are particulars around that game that would get in the way of doing business right now. But should the right circumstances come along, should a compromise be made on either end, I will eat crow, and we will be a miniatures company for that game, because I think Dorosure is chef's kiss, right? Chef's kiss. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's played that, but it's good. And then Dragon Geass. So some people would say, really? You would do the miniature things? for a game that had 2 failed Kickstarters? And I would say yes, I would. Because those Kickstarters were not operated effectively. I don't think there was a clear marketing plan in place. I mean, this is just me from the outside. I got no inside information on how those campaigns went. Just looking at it from the same lens that everyone else is looking at it, other than I got some behind the scenes information of being someone who runs a tabletop games company. I think with the right marketing, the right plan, the right Kickstarter presentation, some concessions being made toward its miniatures, that game could be a success. It should have been a success. Instead, it was a failure twice on Kickstarter. Now, part of that is it's just hard. So, Dragon Geass is an Arclight game. Actually, people who have watched the show before know how much I love Sakura Wars. One of Sakura Wars designers worked on Dragon Geass, in addition to some other big names, but nevertheless, the campaign was run by Arclight. They're a Japanese company, and they were presenting the Kickstarter campaign as an English product. It is hard. It is hard. If you are a company based out of and selling in one territory and are trying to market and sell your game that has done well in your territory, the territory where you're based out of, in a territory that is not your own, that you don't fully understand how to crack or tap into in order to drum up interest in business. So I think Arclight probably needed to partner with someone on that, or they just needed to hand over the publishing rights. Now, I don't think they wanted to, because Dragon Geass was such a success in Japan. I think they thought, we're a shoe-in for success, and why would we bring in a partner if we can take all the profits on this ourselves? And I totally get it. That was from one angle, from a business angle, from one business angle, I totally get it, and that made sense. But that angle only makes sense if you've got all of the elements to drive success. And they didn't have all of the components and elements to drive success. Arclight has had one other that I can think of, successful English-based Kickstarter, and that was for Deca Slayer. It wasn't a wildly successful Kickstarter. I think it took in like 40 grand or so. So I think they probably thought, hey, we did all right with Deca Slayer. We know enough, we can do this. And it just didn't work out for them. It didn't work out for them either time. I think they presented a product that was confusing to the marketplace and that had no real marketing behind it. So I would definitely, I would get on board with Dragon Geass if Arclight was like, hey, LionWing, you want to help us out here? I would say, yes, I certainly would like to help you out there. I don't know if I would seek them out myself to say like, hey, do you need help? But if they came to me, I would listen. I have a random question because I'm curious. What are you doing when you touch your headset every now and then? So my headset automatically turns off when there's no audio being played through it. So it turns off like every 20 minutes or so that there's no audio being played through it. So it turns off here and there. But I keep it on because I do like to be able to hear when something pops up. And I like to be able to hear the intro and the outro so I know when to start recording and not. Another question. Would you consider acting as a consultant instead of as a publisher? You mean on projects in general, on Dragon Geass? Provide some specificity there for me and I will answer that question. I'm not above a consultancy role at all in any capacity, and you said both. Okay. So I would certainly, I would gladly act as a consultant, especially on projects where I know we wouldn't want to do anything with ourselves. Like if it was a game that I was like, well, that doesn't really make any sense for us to publish, but I want that to get to the marketplace. Even if we're not the ones who do it. Yeah, I would gladly help out. Especially if it's a company that I know. And, I kind of know Arclight because I know Simon, who is their primary English representative there, who handles a lot of their business relationships with overseas folks. So I know them. So I would gladly act as a consultant on that, and I would gladly act as a consultant on any game. If a Japanese publisher came to me and was like, "Hey, we want to bring this game to the English market. We want to do it ourselves. Can you provide us guidance?" Hell yeah, I would gladly do that. Now, if it was a game I wanted, then I would be like, well, actually, I think you should let us publish it, because I do think that when it's the right fit, that we could we would be the better company to take that game and to present it to the English market. So. Sin Theory in the chat said, just looked in Dragon Geass and I would have emptied my bank account. That looks sick as hell. Yeah. That's the frustrating part about about both campaigns is the game is a game. Like, that's a banger of a game. They weren't trying to push a shitty game. They were pushing a good game, and one that found a lot of success in Japan. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. It did very well for itself in Japan. So it's like, there is this awesome game that is done. That's just sitting there. And the rest of the world can't play it. Because ArcLight couldn't quite figure out how to get into the Western territory. It's just such a shame. It's such a shame. I mean, it's such a shame anytime that a Kickstarter fails, but it's a huge shame when a Kickstarter fails, not because of the merits of the game, but because of a lack of something on the publisher's end or on the designer's end if they're self-publishing. That's the worst story. That's the worst story. That's the one I don't like to hear. Because then everyone suffers. The designer suffers, the publisher suffers, the game suffers, and the customer suffers because the customer doesn't get a badass game. And Dragon Geass is a badass game. Okay. Let's get to some project updates. We've been going at this for how long now? Hour and 7 minutes. Okay. So probably going to go a little over that hour and 15-minute mark. Project updates. Testament. So we are just waiting on 2 questions to be answered from Kuro. Now, we've been waiting on those same 2 questions to be answered from Kuro for like 2 weeks now, but Kuro is a man who moves on Kuro's time. And when I think of Kuro, I often think of that Gandalf phrase at the beginning of Fellowship when someone, maybe it's Frodo, says like, "You're late," and Gandalf jokingly says like, "A wizard is never late, he arrives just when he means to." Well, that's kind of Kuro. Kuro gets to things just when Kuro means to. And just when Kuro means to oftentimes means at a time later than you hope and want and anticipate. Though we've been working with Kuro for long enough that I kind of knew that this would happen. But I am pushing on Manifest Destiny to get answers from him. So we did, let me pull up my notes here. Not my show notes, some other notes. We have gone through, and we do have the errata pack mostly finalized, minus these 2 questions, because I think the 2 questions are going to require at least 1 card to be included in the errata pack. Let me see if I can, here we go, get my list out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so we've got about 12 cards that'll be in the errata pack, maybe 10 cards. That'll be in the errata pack. No, 10 cards. 10 cards right now that are going to be in there. Now, 5 of those are the obvious ones. It's Taunt and Fortress, and both of the alternate art for the Kickstarter characters. Because of course, the alternate art versions just had to be the 2 cards with misprints on them. So again, Taunt, Fortress, and Lunana, her rank 5 card, which had nothing on it. All of those cards were printer issues. We didn't have anything to do with those, unfortunately. Neither did Japanime. Those are going to be 5 of the cards. And then the remaining 5, but maybe 7, because I'm still waiting on these 2 cards from Kuro. I don't know, it might extend to 13 when we do our final pass. Nevertheless, the other cards will be ones that needed to be corrected. Things like boss card 2/5, 1/7. We're going to include a timings card for the EX mode to outline exactly the timing of using the items, the loot drops. And then I think we got 3.7 and 1.3 in there, I think. So we've got that pack pretty much done. I was in the Illustrator files last week, cleaning up wording and formatting, because we had to change the wording on some of those, kind of threw everything off, so it took a little bit of time. But that errata pack is happening. So we're just kind of waiting on Curl. That's Testament. Wild Hunt Festival. So we this morning I gave the go ahead to Funnigan, which is our fulfillment company, to start fulfilling international shipments starting Monday. So whether we here in North America and Canada and Mexico, if North America, I don't know why I had to specify that. If we don't get it this week, international shipments are still going out next week. I can't wait around any longer. I mean, I have no, I consider myself a pretty patient person. I have very little patience for something getting stuck in customs for over 3 weeks. To me, that's blasphemy. I can't come up with a sound explanation on why in the fuck that's a thing. So I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to make the rest of the world wait because North American customs can't get their head out of their asses. So, because at 3 weeks, that's a head in your ass kind of situation. That's not like, we're just like a little slow. That's like incompetence. So, I mean, I don't mean to throw people under the bus. That's not really my style. But when you hold up my product for 3 weeks, it might be 4, I don't know. Then I get angry. I was cool the first 2 weeks, very understanding. We're in week 3 now. I'm not understanding anymore. So incompetence. Let's see here. So that's what's happening there. Okay, let's talk about DLC Pack 2, since it was a question earlier. Yeah, so the original plan was for DLC Pack 2 to be released in June, and then DLC Pack 3 to be released in July. We're going to be a month off, so DLC Pack 2 is going to be released in July, and all things willing, DLC Pack 3 will be released in August. So the next DLC Pack 2 is called Pumu Rhapsody. It's got the theme of summertime. So our first DLC pack had the theme of winter, obviously. This one, the theme of summer. Let's show off some concept art. I said I'd show off some concept art. That's what we're going to do. Here we go. So here's our first one. Let me blow this up a little bit. I'm not going to give any context about what any of this is, because I'm not giving away characters. I'm not giving away story. Karate is a very lore-driven game. I want you to experience that lore when playing the game. So I won't talk about who this is, what it means, the context, anything like that. I just want to show the design. Give you a few minutes or a few seconds to take a look at that. I love liner notes concept art. I think how they conceptualize their characters is really cool, and just how they illustrate and even color their concept art is just super fun to me. Thanks, Locksmith in the chat said looks great. Yeah, I think so too. The thing that I like probably more than anything in this line of work is watching something go from conception to final product. Wild Hunt Festival, there's been a lot of like watching from conception to final product happening, just because Liner Note and specifically Ramo-san has been so great about keeping me in the loop and wanting to keep me in the loop along the way, and even eliciting feedback from me like, hey, what do you think about this? So I've sung Ramo-san's praises enough throughout the months. I won't do any more of that, but I really like their process, and it's been fun to watch these things evolve. So there's that. Let's look at the next bit of concept art. Concept art number 2 from DLC Pack 2. What do we got here? So I think if I blow this up, it ends up pixelating a little bit, but whatever. Let's do it. All right. I love this. So I don't want to give away any context, but just remember this is called Pumu Rhapsody. You know, Pumus are like the little slimes in Cradia's world. So, you know, put two and two together here and figure out what's happening. As soon as you do, it's very, very funny. So I don't have a clear vision of where Ramo is going with the story for DLC Pack 2. So DLC Pack 1, I knew mostly ahead of time, like what was going to happen in the story there. And I know the various characters of DLC Pack 2. I know the boss of DLC Pack 2, but I don't have all the narrative elements yet. So like I'm waiting with bated breath, just like you all are, to know what story is going to be told in this DLC pack. So let me mention this, because I don't know if I've mentioned this before with Wild Hunt Festival. Ramo and I agreed when we were localizing the game and when we were developing new content for the Kickstarter and the DLC, we both agreed that we weren't always going to give players the full story. That we would intentionally leave out information, certain details, elements of the lore that we didn't want to reveal just yet. As I've mentioned, this is a series, right? And it's Liner Notes' baby. This isn't like a one and done series. This is a series that's going to be around for a while. And so Ramo has a clear idea of its narrative trajectory. So his big thing to me was like, hey, I don't want, when I was creating this, I didn't want, and then with this new content, I don't want to like spell out the story for people. I certainly want to give details about events and characters, and I want all that, but I also want there to be some abstract stuff in there. So I said, okay, thank you for that information. We will definitely, we'll run all of our, edits by you, because Ramo is bilingual, but we'll run all those things by you. So ultimately you're going to be the one who says yes or no to whatever we write. And I also did that because it's like, hey, if something makes it in the game and it shouldn't be in there, remember, you signed off on it. You read it all. But also I just wanted him to know, like, hey, we're going to respect that and we're going to keep that in mind. And so you will notice when you read through, probably not, even the character booklet, but especially the quest log, there will be things that you'll feel like you don't have the full story to just yet. And that was very intentional because there is more planned. There are various distribution models planned for Cradia. And so because both we and Liner Note picture this as being a longer tail type of project, we're not going to be giving away all the answers just yet. So some of that will be apparent when you're reading through some of the story. You'll say, hold on a second. I don't have that information, and that's intentional. And other things you will have information on, or other things you'll be able to connect dots between two disparate things that are in that game. But we made a very conscious choice to say, all right, some things we're going to spell out, and other things we are definitely not going to spell out. And that will continue through the DLC, though I would say that DLC Pack 1, y'all have no context for DLC Pack 1. I don't know if you've read through it, but you have no, larger narrative context for what's happening other than, what is happening in that actual story in DLC Pack 1. But DLC Pack 1, the story is more on the nose, just because it needed to be. It's a more scenario-driven thing. There was an opportunity for us to tell a contained story. And with a contained story, you probably want to get in all your details. You want to tell a story from start to finish. You don't want to be too abstract with it because you're not going to revisit that story. Whereas the larger narrative of Cradia, that's not a contained story. So you want to leave elements open to interpretation. You want to leave creative freedom for yourself later on down the line, you also want to leave people interested in talking, about your story. One of my favorite things to do as a customer or a fan of certain series is I like to engage with friends or folks on Discord about like, oh, where do we think that's going? Final Fantasy VII Remake is one of the ones that I love talking about right now, especially after finishing the Yuffie DLC. I'm like, all right, so I'm kind of believing in this two timelines theory here for Final Fantasy VII Remake, but Square's not spelling it out for us. I like that, and Ramo likes that storytelling as well, and so for both of us to like that storytelling, you can better believe it's going to be in Wild Hunt Festival. So I'm really excited for people to, of course, play the game. First and foremost, it's a board game. Game emphasis. We're excited for people to play the game, but I'm also excited for the fans out there who I know exist will want to dig into the lore to be like, oh, what do we think this means? There was an omission here. Does that mean anything? Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. So this is also why I'm frustrated about Wild Hunt Festival being stuck in customs hell. I want people to play the damn game. Okay. Asai in the chat said that's obviously a good guy. Maybe. Maybe not. Gun and Gun. So, I think I mentioned this. So I dropped a Gun and Gun update last week. I think I dropped it in the update there, and I, of course, have mentioned it here in the Discord. We are going to be running another Gun and Gun event. We're going to talk about what that event is in July. It'll be a little different than Operation Bulletstorm. Some things will carry over from that experience, and other things, lessons were learned, and we will be implementing some new stuff. And also, we'll be implementing new stuff because we just want to implement new stuff, not because we didn't like how something was run or not run with Bulletstorm. We just want to try something new. But we'll be talking about details of that event in July. That means it'll probably run in early August, which means it'll run. It'll probably happen. I'm hopeful that there are no shipping faux pas, but clearly, like in this day and age, that should just be expected. But if it doesn't, hopefully people end up getting their stuff August, September, and so the event will be very timely. I would like to say that the event will likely feature Overheat. So, won't just be core set Gun and Gun. Hopefully that's exciting. And hopefully it's the implications of that are exciting. Other than that, games of mass production. Not much else to say there. We're where we need to be. Embryo Machine. So if you read the campaign update from last night, there's a fan contest incoming. Yes. So if you're around for Wild Hunt Festival, we did a fan contest for that game. I love fan contests. Kind of harkens back to that earlier question of do you support fan stuff? Yes, I do. And this is sort of evidence of that. We're going to be running a fan contest. We're going to announce what those details are also in July. July is going to be a busy month, apparently. The fan contest will start in July, probably end early August. So August will also be a busy month. We're not ready to talk about what the details entail just yet, but it'll have something to do with scenarios. So get your thinking caps on. Probably not too hard to deduce what that likely means. So be thinking about that. And then next up for Embryo Machine, outside of what we talked about in the update of just finishing up the final assets, is we need to test print minis. So that'll be happening over the course of the next weeks and months. Let's see here. I saw some chatter in the Embryo Machine channel today about there being some information that was present on one card, one Embryo Machine unit board that shouldn't have been there. And that stuff's already been taken care of. So as I mentioned, the original assets that were in the Embryo Machine Tabletop Simulator demo were from Pass 1. What we added a couple weeks ago were from Pass 2, and we just finished Pass 3. So what you're seeing in the demo is not reflective of what is going to print. Standard stuff there. Okay, and lastly, our new project. So, Midnight Saga we're delaying until fall. Our new project, we're not ready to reveal just yet, but we will be revealing as soon as fulfillment finishes on Wild Hunt Festival. We'll be announcing what that project is. Now, I did see people today asking for a hints channel. I did it for Midnight Saga. We gave the project a code name. You could jump in and speculate as to what that code name was. One person got it right. Mox in the chat got it right. Called it before we officially announced it. I think I mentioned last week or the week before, I hadn't planned on doing that for this next project that is now in the July spot. But if people want it, I'll do it. I got nothing against doing it. I just wasn't planning on it because I wasn't even sure people would want to do it because it's like, we just kind of did it. But if people want to do it again, like I'm definitely down. I already know what I would tease, so it wouldn't be too challenging. Sai in the chat said, so U.S. Customs is responsible for not getting our announcement? Yeah. Yeah, they are. For a good reason, though. Kickstarter only allows you to have so many unfulfilled projects at one time. Which means if you have a certain amount of outstanding projects that haven't been fulfilled, they won't greenlight your upcoming project, which means you can't create a lander page, which means you can't create a page that allows someone to hit that button that says like sign up upon launch or whatever, like notify me when the game or when the project launches. So our next announcement, we want the announcement to coincide with the lander page being live. So the only way to make that lander page live, though, is to get clearance for that project. And the only way to get clearance from that project is to fulfill one of our other projects, which means Wild Hunt Festival has to be fulfilled. We had already planned on Wild Hunt Festival being fulfilled at this point. So, this whole pandemic stuff it's held up backers from getting the thing they want. It's also fucked up our schedule, too. So, I haven't been in a super great mood all week and really last week. I think my wife hates LionWing right now and hates Kickstarter right now. So that's why we're waiting to announce it. And that's why I say, yes, sort of Customs is responsible for not getting that announcement. But really, it's kind of Kickstarter. But Kickstarter is, they got their hands tied. They can't do anything. And that's because Customs. So vicious cycle. I changed my mind. All the bad things in the world are no longer Ben's faults. It's U.S. Customs' fault. Right now I'm so angry about the process. This is funny because I'm not like someone who gets angry, but I'm angry. I'm so angry about the process that, yeah, I'll go with that. I'll put everything on U.S. Customs. I don't care. Trust me, they don't care that I'm angry about them. Clearly. Okay. That's it. That's all the updates I got. Hour and 28 minutes in. I would just like to say, at the beginning of the show, I say, we talk about LionWing games, which we do. We talk about localization because we talk about the process, so we do. We talk about tabletop games because you ask questions about tabletop games, and I answer those things. Just like what's something that the tabletop gaming market needs right now. We talk about Japanese games, obviously, a lot. But I wanted to mention, on the topic of Japanese games, if you haven't checked out a little game called Hat Clad, which is on Kickstarter right now, definitely pop over to Kickstarter, type in Hat Clad, all one word, and you will find a badass deck constructing competitive card game. Or deck builder, I should say, competitive card game. Super cool post-apocalyptic type card game for 4 players, if I'm remembering correctly. It can be played solo, if I'm remembering correctly. It's from Susabi, who's done a number of really cool battle card games. So they've got a great track record. The art style is very, very cool, very unique. Some people would say it's derivative, and it certainly has elements of it where you're like, oh yeah, I've seen these styles of designs. I see the game and I'm like, oh yeah, it looks like Nier, and some other anime, but the game is really cool. and it's doing extremely well on Kickstarter. And it's definitely worth checking out, even if you're not going to back it because there's no English component to it. I would be remiss to have a show where we talk about Japanese games and I not mention Hat Clad while it's on Kickstarter. It's becoming more and more common for Japanese designers to launch Kickstarters for their project. And Kickstarter has mostly been seen as sort of a Western platform, and Japanese folks are jumping on it, which is cool. Most of the time, they're doing it just for Japanese language games, which means it's prohibitive a little bit if you don't know the language. But it's great that designers are making money, because all these folks, I want them to continue to produce games. And one of the ways to do that is to make money to fund those next games, right? So really excited for Susabe. They've had success in the past, but I don't think they've ever run a crowdfunding campaign to my knowledge. I don't think they ran any like campfires or anything. So it's really cool to see that game just like really explode in popularity. So check out Hat Clad. Mox in the chat says, they said in the comments they are planning to work on English version after the Japanese release. And then Shinsuke said, tell me you're localizing it. I can't say anything. It looks like a cool game, though. Definitely looks like a cool game. Okay. I think that takes us to the end today. Well, hour and 35 minutes. I was only 20 minutes off of what I wanted to be. But good conversations, great questions. Thanks everyone for submitting those questions. Less questions, but I think I took nearly the same amount of time talking about this question. It's kind of nice when you have less questions. You don't have to rapid fire through them so quickly. You can really spend time, give them room to breathe, dive into the details. Maybe people get bored about that thing. Maybe sometimes I go a little too in the weeds or inside baseball, but it's fun to talk about those things. So when there's less questions, I do get a chance to talk more, but I appreciate anyone who submits a question. This is my favorite part of the show. It's why I do the show. I think people like hearing me answer those questions because you never know what I'm going to say, especially when I haven't seen the questions before. New format. There we go. All right, we got multiple people talking about the new format. See, I would have forgotten it. That was like an hour and 30 minutes ago. I'm on to the next thing. Okay, so new format. Not necessarily a new format, but also a new format. I'm going to be bringing on more people to the show. I am going to be bringing on, and I talked to Fern briefly about this when he won Operation Bulletstorm, but so long as he's still open to it, I want to bring on Fern to talk about Gun and Gun. I'm going to be looking, however, to continue that trend after Fern of bringing in some guest hosts. Now, some of these guest hosts will be LionWing team members. Most of the time, they'll be LionWing team members. But I also want folks from the community to be able to come on. I also want other designers to be able to come on. Or I should say other designers. I want designers to be able to come on. I want to be able to bring people in to the fold and to just talk about tabletop games. So that won't be every week or anything like that. It's not going to be like a regular thing. But it will be semi-regular. And I think it'll be a nice change of pace. We'll be able to keep this format and at the same time have some shows that diverge from the format. We'll get some new voices in here, some fresh faces. I know I want to talk with Winona on stream a couple more times. One is to go over our Gun and Gun presentation, our Gun and Gun localization presentation that we did back in October. That was never, it was recorded, but the quality is so bad that I'm not willing to put it up anywhere. So I'd like for us to talk about what the localization process was like on Gun and Gun, because it was very interesting, very challenging. I'd like people to kind of see what that process was like. I also I'll be bringing her on for the next project as well. She's working on Main Knight Saga, but she's also working on the game that took Main Knight Saga's place. So I will be bringing her on once that announcement has been made. We'll probably do a show dedicated to that project the first week that we're live on Kickstarter for that one. I'm going to be bringing Tyler back to talk about Embryo Machine and to also talk about Sinome. So there are no recorded talks anywhere of us discussing the localization process on Sinome. So I'd like to do that. I'd like to bring Eli on as well, because Eli has been an editor on every single LionWing game thus far in some capacity. Most of the time, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 out of 5 games. He was the lead editor. Gun and Gun was the only time that he played like backup editor. So I'd like to bring him on because he has a process, and we've had very long conversations about why we should or shouldn't change, the wording of this. And I think he'll be able to provide some insight into the localization process that you won't be able to get anywhere else. I'd like to bring on the translators as well, some of the translators that we've worked with, Noelle and Sam specifically. I'd like to bring them on. I think Noelle would be a lot of fun because she's got a lot of different knowledge and experience. Sam has a lot of knowledge and experience. Bringing on Chris would be fun. So, I want to bring the translators on. So we're going to be bringing people on and talking about tabletop games, Japanese games, and LionWing games and localization, just as my opening speech says. So I hope people are looking forward to that. That's what I mean by a new format. When I bring on designers and whatnot, it'll be a little bit more interview-like, where we're talking less about LionWing and more about their process, about them, their projects, that kind of thing. So some cool stuff planned for this show going forward. And hopefully you all enjoy it. Hopefully you join us along for the ride. So the shows will never end, Sai says. Yeah, maybe. It depends. Silent Frank. Hey, Frank, missed you. You said, damn, I'm late. You are very late, Frank. Usually you're like one of the first ones here. I don't know if you've ever shown up an hour and 36 minutes and 54 seconds late. So that might be a record for you. Mox says, I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad you are, Mox. And I'm looking forward to it as well. Well then, that'll take us to the end tonight, folks. Thanks for sticking with me. Again, thanks for the questions. Thanks for joining us. We do this every Wednesday. If this is your first time joining us and you missed my opening spiel, then I'm going to say it again. We do it every Wednesday, Twitch, 9 p.m. ET, every week, without fail. I'm sure I'll miss some week, but I haven't thus far. And then we have our sister show, LionWing Plays, which takes place most Mondays. We've missed a couple weeks there, so it's not as regular, but we've been playing some Embryo Machine, so check that out then. And we'll be doing it next week. And be on the lookout, because Wild Hunt Festival, hopefully, is almost here. And that means a new game announcement is almost here. So, it's been fun. Thanks again. I'll see you next week. Bye.